So as you might imagine, having been a rabbi as long as I have, I've been asked all kinds of questions, mostly about Judaism, but other questions as well. And I have people asking me about ritual and tradition and all kinds of things like that. And at this season of the year, the most typical question that I get is, so Rabbi, it's 5776. It's 5776. Where's zero? How did this calendar all begin? How did this all get started? That's the question. And the answer, like every answer in Judaism, not only is a single answer, right, but it's going to lead us into some, I hope, interesting directions. So the year we know is 5776. Well, it's a result primarily of one rabbi's work. He was working in his moment in time, and he worked backwards from his place, so counting the generations in the Talmud and then counting the generations in the Bible. He figured out how long people lived, Noah this year, Abraham and them, yada, yada. And he goes through, and finally he goes, the world was started, well, now 7,600 years ago, right? He figured out that the world was a little less than 6,000 years old. Now, I want to say one thing before I go on. That isn't true, right? We all know that. We all know that that's a legend. The fact is the world is billions of years old. But this rabbi who was working before the age of science. He was working before the Big Bang was understood, before the universe that we lived in was fully comprehended. And we might say, it's quaint and he didn't know a lot. But the reality is this rabbi was an incredibly systematic thinker. He may seem out of touch from our vantage point, but he was very much in touch with his. And he really was willing to question the assumptions of his age. And what you may be surprised to learn, this rabbi who dated the universe as less than 6,000 years old was so radical for his own age, he was declared a heretic. I'm speaking about Maimonides. Maimonides, a 12th century rabbi who was also a philosopher, a physician. Some people actually may know Maimonides' Oath of the Physician. He's also known as the Rambam. And he's considered today by traditional Jews as one of the greatest Jewish thinkers of all time. His systematic work, the Mishnah Torah, has become an authoritative text across the spectrum of Orthodox Judaism. His 13 principles of faith are considered a cornerstone by many of religious thought. And his Guide to the Perplexed is a seminal work in Jewish philosophy. It is considered one of the great writings, but yet he reveals secrets in that were so earth-shattering, so challenging for the time, he used different ways to couch what he said so that the uninformed wouldn't be scared about what he was writing. In his time, this rabbi, who's embraced by traditional Jews today and studied by everyone who wants to understand Jewish thought, was considered a heretic, and his books were even burned. It's an irony that we should learn from today, that in times, one person can be called a heretic, and a generation or two later, they are celebrated as normative and to be extolled. I learned this from Aya, our rabbinic intern. Aya wrote about this in our Rosh Hashanah resource guide. If you have not looked at it, shame on you. It's Yom Kippur. You can make atonement, and the atonement for not looking at it is to go to Cincinnati OJC and look at it right now, and you'll see reference to that, Aya's point about Maimonides. The point being that in one generation, one's a heretic, and another, they're normative. What's interesting, the Rabbi Louis Jacobs from Britain wrote about that. He wrote, "It is no accident that Maimonides, who drew up his 13 principle of Jewish religion, was the first noticed Jewish thinker to attempt a systematic treatment of the various types of heresies." He drove up the first type of, ironically, Jacobs notes, Maimonides himself was accused of heresy. because of his declaration that anyone who believes that God is corporeal is a heretic. Isn't this great? This is Judaism at its best. The rabbi who comes up with the systems of heresy is declared a heretic. It's perfect. It is Jewish par excellence. And now that heretic is celebrated by Orthodox Jews. Jacobs notes also in that article that Zionists were declared heretics because they weren't patient enough to wait for the Messiah to bring the establishment of Israel. Heresy, pushing the envelope in one age, then becomes acceptable in another. But more than just acceptable, when a heretic pushes the boundaries, they open up society and make it more free so that the next generation can explore, grow, and build even more. Maimonides wasn't alone. Spinoza certainly did the same thing. Living in the Netherlands in the 1600s, this non-assuming lens grinder challenged assumptions about the biblical authorship, thus subjecting it to rational analysis. So Spinoza said, I want to understand the Bible and read it through a critical mind, and in doing so, he realized that the text was no longer the revealed word of God, but a human document, and his work opened up biblical scholarship. Not only did he open up the Bible to biblical scholarship, he recognized that the miracles of the Bible could not have happened because he knew that the laws of nature could not be contravened. They couldn't be superseded. So miracles, as they were written, he said, did not exist, thus reinterpreting the notion and nature of God himself. He was credited, Spinoza, for helping to lay the foundation of the Enlightenment, which opened up the world to all the possibilities we enjoy. By challenging the authority of the Bible, he let scholars think, free from the constraints of what the ancestors had said. This influential thinker, who changed the world for his efforts, was excommunicated at age 23. And when he died, because he had been excommunicated, he couldn't be buried in a Jewish cemetery. So if you go to The Hague to this very day, you will see interred there at the new church, Spinoza. When you go to the church, he's in the courtyard, the only grave there. Put a stone on that grave. Celebrate the fact that there was a man who was willing to question and change the world and was willing to be cast out, but he was not unbowed. In our own age, Mordecai Kaplan, perhaps one of the most influential rabbis of the last century, was excommunicated as well. His crime? He rewrote the traditional prayer book. Just a little bit. He said that the notion of chosenness no longer made sense to him because he, like Spinoza, was a religious naturalist. He believed that God couldn't perform miracles because they would contravene the laws of nature. And more than just wrestling with theology, Kaplan felt that it was necessary to reinterpret the language of tradition. That's why he founded Reconstructionist Judaism, reinterpretation of the language, and thus he defined God as the power that impels human beings to become most fully human. Kaplan's interpretation, or reinterpretation, if you will, of traditional prayers and rewriting the prayer books landed him in Harem, excommunication. Zachary Silva writes about this. He says that in June of 1945, a group of Orthodox rabbis assembled in a hotel in New York, and they burned the prayer book of Mordecai Kaplan. The ceremonial book burning concluded the formal excommunication of the founder of Reconstructionist Judaism. Silver observes, that occurred just 1 month after the Allies had defeated the Nazis. 1 month after the Nazis were defeated, people who burn books of Jews, a group of Orthodox rabbis gathered and burned the book of a rabbi because he pushed the envelope, questioned assumption, opened up Judaism to those who wanted a new expression. Today, Kaplan's ideas, his theology, his approach to reinterpreting traditional is normative. It is rare today to find a non-Orthodox Jew who does not say that they reinterpret traditional liturgy so they make it acceptable to themselves. And from our vantage point in time, the questions and issues each of these thinkers raise may not seem radical or striking to us, but in their age, when Maimonides or Spinoza or Kaplan did what they did, they shook fear in the authorities of their age. They questioned convention. They pushed off the shackles of the known and forged new ground. They weren't just thinking about new ideas about God. Their theology also led the way to change the way we approached authority, truth, ethics. They rethought in such a way that they opened up the opportunities and paradigms that allowed Jews to give expression to who they were and who we are becoming. They broke down barriers and opened up society to new possibilities. Maimonides, Spinoza, Kaplan pushed back the barriers, opened up possibilities, and made it possible for us to become who we are. Here, we talk about old Judaism to bold Judaism. We stand in a long line of absolutely incredible thinkers who risked, who challenged, who stood up, who were excommunicated. Frankly, I'm proud that our congregation has challenged convention. And yes, we've been controversial at times, all in the goal, the same goal that they had, of affirming that each and every one of us has the right and the responsibility to affirm for himself or herself who we are as Jews, the right to determine the purpose and course and direction of our own lives. We are free to make our own decisions. No ultimate authority owns us or tells us how to live our lives. We make those decisions for ourselves. For some, this openness and freedom is frightening. There are people who prefer a Judaism of constraints, that prescribe behaviors and tell us what to do, limit personal choice. There are those who worry that if people have choice, they may make the wrong choice. There are people who say, well, where will it end? Understand, every generation somebody asks those questions. That's the questions people ask when they're afraid, when they don't want progress, that they don't know ideas. Yet we must acknowledge that we are the beneficiaries of those who came before us, who were willing to do that in their age, making the choices in their age, push back boundaries, challenge convention, broke rules, and redefined what it meant to be a person, a Jew, an individual. And it seems to me tonight, Kol Nidre, that we should think about those who challenge convention in their age as we think about the future. For Kol Nidre, while it draws us to the past, it really is all about the future. Right before Terry sang, chanted the Kol Nidre, we read it in English. And it said in part, let all our vows and oaths, all the promises and obligations we incur on ourselves between this Yom Kippur and the next. It's not about what we did this past year. What Yom Kippur says to us is we're supposed to be thinking about the future. We're supposed to be making bold assertions about what we're going to do. And if we don't make it, we can be released from them. But the goal is to be courageous, to be forward-thinking. While Kol Nidre reaches back into Jewish history, it really is about taking risks, about pushing boundaries, challenging stale assumptions so we can live a new and fresher life. And collectively, it says to me that we must continue the precedent of great thinkers who questioned, even in the face of being called a heretic. It was they who created the Judaism that inspires us this night. And it seems to me it's our responsibility to continue in their footsteps, to continue questioning assumptions, create more openness and freedom so that the future generations can inherit a Judaism that speaks to who they are and the lives they're living. We have a responsibility to keep the march of progress moving forward, even when we're frightened, even when we're confused, even when we're tired. We can't simply be passive recipients of our inheritance and waste it. We have a responsibility. We were given a gift to be free, to create, to do. And we can't leave it sitting alone. We have to nurture it, work with it, build it, engage with it, so that future generations have a Judaism that speaks to who they are. The need for change hasn't ended. Creativity and dynamism still needs to infuse the Jewish spirit. And we must resist the instinct to say to ourselves, well, this is how it is. We're sort of used to this and we're comfortable, so it should remain this way. It's so easy to become comfortable with the known. And change can make us uncomfortable. But Yom Kippur says to us, change. Take a risk. That's what Kol Nidre says. On this night, when we think about tomorrow, we appreciate the history that brought us here. The authors of Sodom and Gomorrah, the authors of Sodom and Gomorrah who conceived of a person questioning God. Imagine that author. You could ask a question of the ultimate source of authority of the universe. I assume that author was once declared a heretic as well. Maimonides, whose ideas about the nature of God seem minor today, shook the thinkers of his age. Spinoza, who insisted the laws of nature could not be contravened, was thrown out of the Jewish community, but he changed the face of the world. Zionist thinkers who conceived of creating Israel and not passively waiting were called heretics. And Kaplan, who said it's time to rethink the words of our ancestors, his books were burned. These people created the Judaism that's bold, excited, open, and allows us to be here tonight. We stand in that line of those who question, those who weren't satisfied with what is and imagined what could be. A freer, more open Judaism in which each person can realize the potential of who they are. But the journey isn't over. Not now, not yet. Let us proudly take our place in this line of bold thinkers who recognize that our responsibility is not to replicate the past, it is to create the future.